Doing business in the UK is very different to doing business in the US. Doing business over here was not a single nation, it was 50 nations with city, state, different compliance. We came away from the idea of looking at high risk in a slightly smaller category and came to the fact that one of the really broken back problems was in compliance. On an individualized basis, they should not build this. But if you build it and you can provide it as a service, then this becomes an IQ test for the financial institutions to adopt.
I'm Jake Aaron Villarreal, born and raised in Silicon Valley, and here to take you behind the scenes to share what it's like to be a startup founder, the journey they're on, the problems they face, the products they build, and effort to make our lives better. I'm excited to have with us today Leo Patching, co-founder and CEO of Compliant. Leo, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. So great to be here with you.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, Leo. I know we had a conversation a few weeks back, and really excited to dive into your company and the problem you're solving and the space you're in. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about you, and we'll talk about your origin story. I like to always kind of go down a little bit in terms of the background of our guests of, how did you get into technology? How did you become an entrepreneur? Like, what was that origin story that started you off on the track that led you to where you're at today? So, um, I guess before we walk through that, where are you joining us from today?
Yeah, so you're born in Silicon Valley. I was not. London, born and raised, but I now live in Silicon Valley. I think when we chatted, I think I live not far from where you grew up.
Right.
So I'm in San Jose at the moment.
Hundreds of AI startups are launching every month, battling to build their founding teams. As a leader, your job is to get results. When it comes to hiring, that's where it gets tough. So you go out and you try a recruitment firm, but they don't understand your story. They're off target, and when they send you candidates, it's a waste of time. We believe you should never have your time wasted. That's why we launched Match Relevant, because your story is more than just an open role. It's your founder's journey, the problem you're solving, the product you're building, and why it matters. When we work with companies, we make sure we understand your whole story. So when we go out and do a search, we're on target, it's worth their time, they're interested, and more importantly, it's worth yours. And when it comes to hiring engineers, we work to make sure we get it right by deploying a team of seasoned CTOs that have built some of Silicon Valley's best companies. They can collaborate with you in the technical interviewing process, they can be a sounding board, or they can run it for you. When it comes to building teams, there's no time to waste. Let's make it count. If you have a role that needs to be filled, book a time with a hiring guide at matchrelevant.com and learn how we do it.
Yeah. Really cool. I've got a special place in my heart for that town, and excited to jump into your background from London or wherever it started. So, give us the backstory here. What was the DNA that led you into entrepreneurship here?
Yeah, I think I had a bit of a cheat code in that my father was a business owner, entrepreneur, and so I got to see kind of through his journey, the highs, lows, but some of the value he took from business ownership, from kind of how his journey in kind of being an entrepreneur went. And kind of by virtue of his network, I got to be around other entrepreneurs and his network of friends, some of whom actually became investors in my first company, but that kind of jumps a little bit. So always had an interest. I think like a lot of founders, I started from an early age in school, kind of different little ventures, launched my own small business while still in school. And then I think kind of graduated through that process. And I was joking with you on our last chat that my path into entrepreneurship really kind of came from um, being around some entrepreneurs, and I spent some time trying to work for a guy who I'd met at a charity dinner actually, and I pursued him aggressively because I saw some of the values and some of the ways he approached things, and I just wanted to learn. And so I was able to convince him somehow to let me work for him, and I got to sit at the feet of a deal making master. A little bit of a ferocious entrepreneur in some ways. I was a part of his team as he grew his business. Started off in the UK and launched China, India, and I was part of working with him on his deal team. And so went through that process, and then we ran into the buzzsaw that was the great financial crisis. And his business was primarily in real estate, telco, adjacent services. And so that he ran a publicly traded company in the UK that went through a market sale, was a great baptism of fire for me as a learning. And off the back of that, I was able to kind of jump and launch my own business, and kind of that was my kind of pathway in, as it was to entrepreneurship.
Very cool. And I know you've had more than one company or one experience in the entrepreneur space. We're going to be talking today about Compliant, your current company. Is this the first startup that you've kind of led uh, as your really venture-backed startup?
No, this is a fairly unique version of it, actually, in that kind of I came to Compliant. Compliant Genesis story was kind of a search fund project, some great brain trust people around it, and as Compliant was emerging from the initial problem statement, discovery, inquiry process to commercializing, kind of I took the helm at that point, and have been kind of fortunate to be backed by some incredible investors, co-founders that really kind of led the way in a lot of ways. Have they're not day to day in the same way, but incredible kind of market knowledge. I kind of inherited almost a board of titans of industry in the financial services space. I led a venture-backed company out of the UK previously, that bridged to Silicon Valley, which was an amazing experience in itself. I learned the hard way that doing business in the UK is very different to doing business in the US.
Hmm.
Um, Love the mindset shift, but doing business over here was not a single nation. It was 50 nations with city, state, different compliance, like requirements, regulations, a lot more complexity than I was expecting when I first um, kind of from the outside in looking in. The US is obviously kind of the shining light on the hill, the place every entrepreneur wants to get to, but there was a lot of adaptation that was needed when I first joined.
Gotcha. Well, I like the word and the name of of your company, Compliant. I mean, you kind of have an idea of what it's about, but walk us through what was the inspiration behind what it is that you're building and solving, and ultimately, you know, how did this come together?
Yeah. So mentioned previously the search fund idea. One of the early investors that helped kind of somewhat incubate the early project that became Compliant. The problem statement was to explore why payments are so difficult for high risk categories. And this venture fund had done some work in the cannabis space, in other high risk categories, and the principals that experienced just challenges generally in the merchant services space, in banking, and kind of came to us with, why is this so hard? And one of the co-founders was in the fraud and kind of had been in payments for a long time, and one of the other co-founders had done kind of emerging innovation work at Visa, and so we went through this really interesting inquiry of kind of where is the problem, where's the bottleneck, and kind of going back through first principles of this problem to look at it from a payments perspective. What we came out with was payments wasn't broken. The challenge was, if you can't get a sponsor bank and a credit and risk program that approves something because it's not federally legal, there's not really going to be an end-to-end solution that's going to scale. And so we came away from the idea of looking at high risk in a slightly smaller category. From We ran these 300 interviews and discovery processes with banks, payment facilitators, acquirers, issuers, everybody in the space. We got to do this kind of beautiful mind map of the ecosystem, and came to the fact that one of the really broken back problems was in compliance, and specifically the lack of protocol consistency and automation in the compliance space that led to a lengthy, time consuming, expensive process that was also just a terrible user experience. And when all these things came together, and we had enough people that went through, this is an offering that will be relevant enough for us to pay you money, uh, we realized it was a compelling thing to spend some time digging into and building a product for.
Got it. You know, compliance has been around for a long time in banks and traditional ways they look about going through compliance and process and protocols. Um, when you talk about sectors that your product or you're focused in helping solve where it's maybe more complex or I don't know, maybe more unregulated, like walk us through a couple of the areas that you're focused in on that others aren't focused.
Yeah, I love this question, especially looking at it from a kind of startup. Like oftentimes you associate startups, Silicon Valley companies, with a bit of a misnomer of disruption, and disrupting legacy or incumbent, or and I always look at entrepreneurship and kind of business value creation being finding value in areas that are currently underserved. And one of the things we've looked at differently, oftentimes disruption comes from looking at the incumbents and doing something completely different or uniquely outside of that. One of the things that we actually arrived at was the institutional IP in some of the incumbent organizations was incredibly high. And some of the companies, the original fintechs, before fintech was even in the nomenclature, your Mastercards, your Visas, some of the companies we're lucky enough to work with now, the level of talent, the level of knowledge inside the organization, and the sophistication of what they were doing, incredibly high. Where value opportunity sat was in looking at how you can take an existing process and a existing need and solve that in a way that extrapolates out some of the complexity that's there, automates areas that don't need to be as manual, and finds a way to do that in a seamless way that hits across all these kind of varied ecosystem players that need to be serviced. And so in our world, you have an applying business. They apply potentially on a software platform for a service that they will never interface with half of the members of the ecosystem behind them. But everybody in that ecosystem needs to touch certain components of the data. They need to hit certain verifications, run certain credit checks, other elements that all go into that one journey. And so our job is to try and make the complex simple and find a way to run a seamless process across that.
Got it. Sounds like a lot of moving parts, and it certainly doesn't sound super simple, but I guess that's why they pay you guys the big bucks, right? You figure out
It's
how
fun.
to, how to take the problem that no one has been able to solve, or maybe parts of it, and then automate it or simplify it or make the user experience better. Because that's where you keep your customer base, right? Like if you can solve the problem and then the response comes back where they enjoyed the process or it just made their lives easier, that's a good thing. In your opinion, how do you make your customers' lives better?
Yeah, it's something we talk about as a team quite often. We don't sell software, we sell outcomes. The minute you start focusing on the software, like nobody really wants to come to us to buy software. They want to buy outcomes. And can, as you said, in the like we actually are we benefit from the fact that there are people that have solved certain problems in the space. Our job in large part is workflow automation, orchestrating between different solutions. And we see that as a huge opportunity. I typically borrow from the kind of first principles thinking that's been pioneered through kind of the Elon Musk elements, kind of Toby Luck. Shopify has done a great job of this in an adjacent space to us. And our team, kind of a big part of what we do with customers to help make sure that we're building, and we're working towards outcomes as we challenge every requirement that's existing. Kind of why is it there? What's going on? How does it show up? When did this originate? Who, like, how does it sit? So we go through this whole requirements process. Um, as a part of that, some of them are validated and some of them you delete. So the unnecessary steps, get removed. That's kind of part of our extraction process. And that's a place where you can simplify. Then what's left, you start working to optimize. And oftentimes that's not wholesale change. That is, what are you doing today? In our instance, one of the things we do in account opening is customers have fillable PDFs and point solutions where they're taking data from one place, plugging it into another platform, running information there, pulling that data, and you've got literal human beings doing tasks that should be system to system. So we optimize that. Then once you've optimized it, you can accelerate the cycle time. And in our world as well, that all leads to one of the key metrics we play for, which is time to money. So reduce abandonment, reduce the cost, accelerate account opening, you accelerate time to money, everybody's happier. And then kind of the key piece for us, and it is the future of where we're going, the skating to where the puck is automating. So we then run through different elements of how, once you've optimized, simplified, you can automate elements that really do become, we joke we're the worst paid digital transformation consultants in the world because we don't charge for that service. But when we get there, you create magic.
Yeah, that's really cool. This is a interesting space. Why is it so important to you?
Yeah. And I think I bored you with this as well. Specifically, this part, I previous to Compliant, I ran a payment services company, and enjoyed a lot of what we were doing. Hit a bunch of the similar verticals, and and we even had some of the imagery where we built a rocket ship that was being pulled by a horse and buggy, because some of the engagements we'd had with the legacy financial institutions uh, meant that whatever we built on the front end was completely anchored by the lack of automation, technology, and infrastructure on the back end with some of the legacy players that we were dealing with at that time. So I felt the personal pain of selling a dream to SaaS founders, companies that expected a user experience and a speed that went with the software that we were showing, and then dealing with not being able to manage their expectations or deliver on the promise of what we'd built because we could not control the back end. And so looking at Compliant, it was solving for what I'd had so much brain damage and trauma in losing deals and losing like big 8-figure contracts over, and not being able to service this market. Uh, and actually hit this point where I understood why they weren't addressing this. And it was because economies of scale, single operators, it didn't quite pencil to invest the time, energy, attract the talent, and build the actual software needed to build, maintain, monitor, upgrade this specific orchestration platform for compliance at that time, especially on an individualized basis. They couldn't prioritize it on their roadmaps because they had so much stuff they had to build. And so, looking at it from the outside in, having seen what it was like on their customer side, the opportunity there was huge to, on an individualized basis, they should not build this. But if you build it and you can provide it as a service, then this becomes an IQ test for the financial institutions to adopt.
Yeah. You know, when you're talking to a financial institution or whoever your client happens to be, who in that organization cares about this type of solution? Who are you selling to?
Yeah, we just had an on-site last week, and we do a fairly regular ICP definition kind of run through, and it's always one of those kind of fun internal debates, and the whole team play a role in it. We do this kind of cross-team collaboration on making sure that that living, breathing doc is kept live inside the team, and different parts of of our own org can empathize more kind of greatly with specific personas that fit within us. And so we talk to uh, within the financial institutions, we'll talk to the credit and risk team. Oftentimes, that is on a specific kind of needs basis where either there's a tailwind where there's been regulatory changes, enforcement actions, things that have happened in the space, and that will prompt that persona or that buyer to make a move or be looking for a solution. And over the last 2 years, there have been some kind of billion-dollar enforcement actions that put everybody on notice that regulation is actually being enforced and we are seeing beneficial ownership changes and all the things you need to do to kind of sanctions lists, the reviews and reporting that are required. So that hits those individuals. One of the loudest voices in the room at any company or any buyer that we talk to is revenue. And if you can show a way whereby you can accelerate their path to revenue, revenue is always a key buyer that is easy for us to talk to and get enrolled in a vision and then sell internally. We also always talk in our world about treating the developer like a first-class citizen. And a lot of our product and this space has been transformed by companies like Stripe, like Square, Adyen, that have done a really good job of treating the developer like a first-class citizen and providing them a toolkit of APIs, webhooks, can, solutions that actually meet their need and make it a delightful experience. And so we work closely as part of our sales cycle with the development teams too.
Got it. Makes a ton of sense to me. You know, as you look at almost every sector, AI is playing its role there, and it's either automating or simplifying or maybe making the user experience better, just giving you better access to data. Um, how do you see the role of AI evolving for fraud prevention and compliance without increasing exposure to regulatory scrutiny and unattended consequences?
Yeah, we benefit again from some of the kind of knowledge base on our board and some of the partnerships we have. So we work closely with companies that have been doing kind of AI for fraud prevention before it was kind of cool, before the Chat GPT moment of a couple of years ago. And so we were built upon the foundation of um, kind of deterministic AI. We have a lot of work we've done with in kind of the ML ops space. And obviously, as things have gone forward, there's a huge potential in the agentic future within our space. As you look at any manual process that is repeatable, you can obviously automate. And as you automate, there's a massive opportunity with the the capabilities that we have today that were not here um, just a couple of years ago. The acceleration of change. It's also been interesting when you talk about the unintended consequences for certain elements of what we do. Deterministic AI fits, meets the need, has a lower cost to compute. Everything there actually makes sense. We're not blind to the fact that the landscape is changing quickly and we have to stay current. And so we have within our Eng team, we have a team that is fully focused on where is it now and asking the question that of like what's still going to be true in 10 years time, and really kind of going through a rigorous process of don't get stuck looking at shiny objects. Again, ask the question of what are our customers willing to adopt today, because that's also important. If we can't get through regulators with specific technologies today, there's no point in us doing it. But what things can we pick off within our process that will be valuable? Again, to our thing of not building software. We also don't build AI. We just build outcomes, like finding things that really do drive actual measurable outcomes for our customers. So can it reduce speed? Can it accelerate time to completion? Can it produce a better user experience for our customers?
Yeah, well said. You know, compliance has traditionally been seen as a back office function. How is it changing, and why should fintech leaders start treating it as a core business strategy?
Yeah. Back office, and even when you talk to some of the compliance teams, they've felt like an afterthought. And both having seen the pain of compliance not being met, but also having to play catch up with um, getting customers onboarded or anything that has kind of gone to providing a bad experience for the customers they're looking to onboard, but also the customers they're looking to maintain. Um, Our belief is that compliance is coming out of the back office into the forefront, because if you address it up front, and it's another a kind of use case for us with AI is, we talk about having been built from the regulations forward. So rather than building a product and then trying to make sure it's compliant, establish what compliance looks like. So what is the picture of good? Establish that up front, build that framework into the product so it's in the DNA of what you're building, and then have the automation and the process of delivering the product run on that basis. You take out a lot of the manual process, you take out the after work, and you have it basically the end product. If you hit an audit or you need to do continuous monitoring or anything like that, you're already set up to do what you need to do. You're also architected in a way, and this is kind of the piece where the compliance team really help accelerate revenues. If regulations change, you don't have to shut a program down and catch up. You just reconfigure what's set up because it's built into the DNA of your product. So it can be a force multiplier on the sales teams. And when you can evidence, we talk about it as our triple benefit. When you can evidence that you can reduce OpEx through economies of scale, through automation, through reducing time in the actual process, you can accelerate revenue through reduced abandonment, different things, and you can also hit the kind of special piece at the end that we always push our customers to think on is the customer experience. Unfortunately, in financial services, especially in B2B, that's been an afterthought. And so if we can keep these two thoughts in our head at the same time of have the friction that's needed to ensure that you have a mechanism that keeps the bad actors out and puts the good actors through in the most seamless way you can, but also find ways to delight your customers through the process. In that instant, you see the service of products that really do become transformational.
Yeah, well said. I always like to ask what you've learned as a leader and some of the insights you can provide to the audience that they can learn from. Before we go there, though, you've gone out, you've raised 14 plus $1 million. You've got a team that's in San Jose and distributed. Um, when you look in the market and you look at your company, what's the biggest challenge you see currently as you are continuing to grow, evolve, and build your organization?
Yeah. And this is one where kind of in conversations, I always love to kind of keep it real and be uh, kind of all have talking points about what is your biggest challenge, and it's like scaling too quickly, or like you hear these things parroted. I think the whole venture landscape has shifted, and so we've been fortunate, um, and kind of we've worked really hard as a team to get funded from institutions that have been incredible kind of believers, and they have doubled down kind of additional funding to kind of give us the runway we need to build the products that our customers are drawing out of us. So we've been kind of at a good crossroads with that. But I do think everybody is acutely aware that capital markets have changed. There's been a level of volatility, and so we have definitely gone through a refining process to ensure that every small bet and blind alley we go down is kind of measured. That where we are taking risks, we do a lot of assessment first, and where we are allocating resources, we do it in a capital efficient but very intentional and thoughtful way, where we can again map that closely to how we can build for the future and deliver in the near term as well.
Got it. Really cool. Well, let's then hit the second question I had for you, which is, you know, what are the biggest lessons you've learned as you're scaling your current business, and what advice could you give others, and entrepreneurs in particular, looking to build in the fintech space or the reg tech space?
Yeah, yeah, big question, and lots of things come to mind. I think one of the things we talk about as a team is embracing the unknown, um, finding ways so to make decisions quickly. You kind of finding momentum, kind of moving forwards. One of the things I think I've learned and our team has embraced is there are times where you have to make decisions with incomplete information. And there's a component to that where it's taste, it's enough data points, it's experience, but being willing to move and make decisions and take action has been a huge thing for us, kind of pushing momentum. We also kind of parrot some of the other Valley maxims of strong opinions loosely held. We built opinionated software, and so uh, we have a very strong opinion on how compliance should be approached, and we do try and assert that. We also then are always open to new information and changing our opinion, and that's the kind of key thing in configurability of our product. I think one of the things you and I talked about on our first call was, I think talking points in these sessions oftentimes get lost on early stage in an entrepreneurial career. You oftentimes are told that everybody has their little imposter syndrome moments, and so you start trying to mimic or kind of cosplay as a CEO or an entrepreneur. And in doing so, you see these two binaries. You see either I'm going to be contrarian, and the minute you try and play contrarian and it's not who you are or what you're actually sitting with, it's not genuine. People smell that a mile off. Or you've not had to deal with a lot of conflict or confrontation, and you then form the path of consensus. And so these kind of binaries of consensus and contrarianism lead you down terrible paths, and you end up at the kind of the final parts having the consequences of this, and you realize, actually, I didn't believe that, but I did that because I was trying to play a role. And so not feeling the need or reacting to the impulse to play a role, but really sitting with this. These are the data points that inform what I'm thinking. How do I feel about this? Surrounding yourself with a cabinet of advisors that can really help test you and also are not yes people, incredibly valuable and something that can't be. I don't think that can ever be emphasized how strong of a cheat code having those people in your corner is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough being a leader. You don't always have the right direction or path. You got to make some choices and take some chances. You just don't always get it right. And then you have to learn from it. As a company, oftentimes you hit certain milestones, it evolves and you see the progress and you're excited about what you're doing and the people on the journey. But the same is true of the leader of the company. You oftentimes have to evolve to really take your company to another level. And as you look at yourself, what is a breakthrough? What's a point of growth where you've seen, when I started this company, or maybe in my first company where I'm at now versus then, what have been a few breakthroughs or some areas of growth that you now know that you've had to go through and you're at where you're at that you can share with others that might be able to learn from, some of your learnings, if you will.
Yeah, as a someone who was a very young CEO, um, if you talk to the teams I led 15 years ago, um, they would have some harrowing tales, and so happy to share those. I think my wife always reminds me of one of my team members back then, kind of having a bit of a meltdown at me because I had a long weekend away, and I came back in the office, and she saw a book in my hand, and she said she had this like really panicked look, and she's like, don't do anything new. We haven't even done the thing you talked to us about last week. And I think kind of what that was speaking to was, as a young leader, I didn't I didn't figure out that you do need to have some guardrails around um, the information you share with your team at times, and also they don't all need to ride the roller coaster with you on every thought that pops into your head. Um, and so finding a way to be consistent, and at that point, I think I joke now that you're a pilot of a plane, and your job is to not give the passengers or the people on the journey with you kind of sickness, or like they don't need to experience turbulence just because something's popped into your head. And I would do that. I'd go and I'd read a new book, and all of a sudden we're going on this path, and then the amount of whipsawing people went through that didn't produce outcomes. Now in our company today, if something's important and we prioritize it, then that absolutely is something we talk about, we share, we get on board with, and if a change needs to happen, be decisive. But that's infrequent, and if that is very frequent, then there's a problem. And so I think kind of not whipsawing the team, not just trying to implement every new idea, methodology, kind of, yeah, you don't need to read a book and come in and try and teach your team something new every week. Was a big learning for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good lesson to learn. It's also one of those when you talk about like maybe putting guardrails up around information that needs to be shared versus not. I mean, you want everyone to be engaged of what's going through your mind, but at some point they don't need to fear the things that that you see. Maybe it could be financial, maybe it's, hitting payroll and like we got to close these deals and whatever it happens to be, they don't need to know it all. That's kind of maybe one of the things of a leader that you do is you protect your people to a point, but you're transparent enough so they know like what has to get done. And that's always a tricky one, but that's really great. We're 2 months into, really almost, well, three months now into 2025. As you look at this year and going forward, what's on the roadmap? What are you excited about?
It is actually wild that we're in March now. I can't quite get my head around
It's
that.
crazy.
Yeah, and it is again, the benefit of having our team on site last week was having a check-in of we did some planning in Q4, kind of kicking into this year. We're already you start initiatives that you need to get going now, otherwise, kind of you're going to hit Q3 and things will be kind of, yeah, it's playing catch up is never fun. And I think as a startup, you always feel under-resourced and kind of with too many things to do. I think one of the fun things we have this year, that is a really exciting thing for myself and the team, is we've taken the Charlie Mungerism of take a simple idea and take it very seriously. Um, as a company, we've hit a maturity point where we've got enough data points and enough customers who've reinforced what is of value of the myriad of things that we were shooting at. And so we're very clear-sighted on what needs to be delivered to meet the outcomes of the customers we have, and also broaden our approach to market to be able to really dive into it. And we have these two areas of our product. We have account opening, kind of the same obvious piece of capturing the self-reported data from a customer, and running it through that seamless approach, a choose your own adventure story where we capture the necessary information, hit the necessary friction, and we run a series of automation um, tools that run the verifications, score the application, fraud detect, all the things needed to get an account open. And then an area we have pushed in for the roadmap this year is on account health. And so this is the piece that we as a team find really fun. Um, Once an account is open, and a bunch of the kind of enforcement actions of the last few years have been less fraud. Fraud has its own place, and there's a bunch of things there, but it's more being in compliant with what the regulators, what the banks need you to do once an account is opened. And this is a real interesting place for us to apply automation and solve problems. You and I talked in our first call about business being about solving problems. Um, Throughout the industry, finding ways to do the continuous monitoring that we're able to do in an intelligent way that matches with all the information they've got, is in a single pane of glass, and is actually proactive and not just a reactive stance. Um, Super exciting. And I think it actually solves real problems in the market that people are willing to go on the journey with us to bring to life. And I kind of joke about it in an example of, you can do so on the health side of life. You've got nowadays, I just had a Lingo continuous glucose monitor, and we used to do for getting the information on your blood glucose, you used to do blood panels, and still do. And blood panels are a point in time, tell you a lot of information, a deluge of data. But nowadays, it's very easy, and it's become a lot more cost effective. Kind of the everyone's paradox that everyone's using an AI you can apply to kind of glucose monitors. Very cost effective, very easy, very user friendly, great applications. A continuous glucose monitor tells you real time what's happening, and you can check in and see anything that you've consumed, how that spikes your blood glucose. You're not going to do blood panels on a kind of minute by minute or daily basis. You're going to do that sparingly, periodically.
Once a
We are
year, right?
looking to, yeah, exactly. So once a year, but maybe within that period. So say you do it in January to January. Within that period, a lot can change. And so the glucose monitor, in a lot of ways, our account health approach is bringing the glucose monitor to kind of account monitoring. And so we just feel really passionate that this is solving real problems and adding real value
Yeah, I like that analogy. Glucose monitor for the account, uh, for the health of the business. Why not? I mean,
for the health of the business. There
there
you
you
go.
go. Don't need to go and take your blood to tell you how you're doing. Just put on that monitor and you know minute by minute how you're doing. So I like that idea. Um, I'm excited to see how things go and certainly can't wait to meet with you next time up in San Jose. If anybody wants to find Compliant, spell with a K,
Yeah.
where do they go? And if they want to find you, where do they go?
Yeah, so we actually have a shiny new website that our head of design has painstakingly worked on that is I think launching next week. But current one is there too. But compliantwithak.com, and we're easy to find, and also kind of for myself, easy to find on LinkedIn. Kind of my information is out there, as is everybody else's. Yeah, love to hear from anybody on Compliant, and also kind of anything relating to entrepreneurship, the CEO journey, and beyond. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Leo, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I, for one, am excited to see how you guys go into 2025 and beyond. And for the listeners, thanks for listening today. It meant a lot to me. And for everyone else, my name is Jake Aaron Villarreal, signing off for now. But can't wait to catch up with you on the next episode. Until then, Leo, the world, take care.
If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Follow us on YouTube, where we go behind the scenes to learn what it takes to be a startup founder.